This over here is the final nail on Intel's coffin. AMD just released the AMD Threadripper 9000 series Pro and non-Pro CPUs, and I just put them to the test. And I am so glad that AMD didn't kill the Threadripper lineup. But how good are they compared to the Intel 285K and the AMD's own 9950X? Is it actually worth going to the Threadripper system as a creator, or should you kind of go to the mainstream instead? What exactly has changed? Because there are some interesting changes under the hood. Let's go. It's so annoying. I don't want to pay hundreds of dollars to just change my Windows wallpaper just because my Windows isn't licensed. Well, why don't you try Hookeys? That's a ton cheaper, and if you use the code TN20, you get it even cheaper. What do you mean? How do I get it and how is it possible? Well, see this video here, or the one you're watching? Click in the link on the video description, add the Windows 11 CD product to the cart, proceed to checkout, add the code TN20 for the extra discount. So what, the Windows 11 Pro OEM key is just $23.22? Yeah. Choose the preferred payment option and complete the purchase. The key will be available on the purchased orders in a few moments. Copy the key and paste it into your Windows activation settings, and you're all done. Oh, that was easy. Is that Ryan Gosling? No. Anyway, by the way, the same discount code also works website-wide, so go check out other products, maybe like Microsoft Office. Now here's the thing, AMD actually launched lots of different things. There are the Pro and non-Pro systems. I've got the non-Pro CPU. We've got the 9970X and then the 9980X, which is actually coming out later on. So if you want to see that video, subscribe if you haven't already, because that's coming up very, very soon. We're testing it right now. But the 32 core, the 9970X, has been tested and looks very, very impressive. So we're going to go over the smaller guy first, and then the bigger guy comes out soon. Subscribe if you want to see that. But perhaps the first thing that we need to look at is what exactly is the difference between the non-Pro and Pro Threadripper workstation. The Threadripper platform is TRX50, and then there's the Pro one, which is WRX90. This is the same socket as the last generation 7000 Threadripper, so these are intercompatible. So if you're already running Threadripper 7000, you can just pop this into and get an upgrade, which is fantastic. And I'm hoping that the next generation Threadripper will be exactly the same. But I've made this little table between WRX90 and WRX50 so we can understand the differences and use cases. Firstly, the WRX90 is a workstation platform, whereas the TRX50 is a high-end desktop HEDT platform. The WRX90 offers AMD Pro manageability and Pro security, which you don't get on the TRX50 platform. Both of them offer OC support, so PBO, and if you want to tune them, which is amazing, so even the Pro CPUs can be tuned. And if you haven't seen my WRX90 Asus motherboard review, you realize that some of these workstation motherboards or server grade motherboards have so many different overclocking features. Apparently, pros want to overclock, and that's exactly what you can do. Apart from some of the OEM models on WRX90 and Ryzen Threadripper Pro, where it's just locked, you can't actually unlock them. In terms of PCIe lanes, obviously on the WRX90, we're getting more compared to the TRX50. So if that is essential for you, like an AI user who wants to build a local LLM machine that has lots of different GPUs in, or perhaps storage or server, then the WRX90 perhaps be more suitable for you. Then memory configuration on the TRX50, we have 4-channel, and on the WRX90, we are doubling that to 8-channel memory, as well as the capacity. Both of them support ECC, and the Threadripper Pro CPUs can go on both of the platform, either the TRX50 motherboard or the WRX90 motherboard. But when you go with the TRX50, you're probably going to lose some of the benefits of the Threadripper Pro CPU, just because the motherboard doesn't offer all of the PCI lanes or connectivity that the CPU could. But some use cases, it might be needed to have the Pro CPU on the TRX50 platform, because some of the motherboard manufacturers have done some cheeky things. For example, take a look at Gigabyte TRX50 AI TOPS motherboard, which kind of is a WRX90 motherboard without having the WRX90 price tag, and it's just an interesting one. But if you look at the Threadripper CPU, then you can't put the Threadripper CPU on the WRX90 workstation or platform, if that makes sense. So let's have a look at the specs and under the hood, what exactly has changed compared to the 7000 Threadripper and also compared to Intel and AMD mainstream. Perhaps you're running the 285K. What's exactly different with this 9970X? The 9950X and 285K on either side here, but I want to focus on the Threadripper so we can really see what's changed from the Threadripper, but then you have the comparison on the side. The new 9970X is still 32 core, 64 thread, nothing's changed in there. You can see that the max turbo frequency has increased 100 megahertz to 5.4 gigahertz, and the base frequency is actually the same, 4 gigahertz on the previous and the newer one. Doesn't have any E cores, so they're still empty there. The max PCI generation is PCI 5, but what has changed is now we get more PCIe lanes. On the previous one, we had 48, but now we have 80 lanes of PCIe Gen 5, which is a nice improvement. In terms of memory speed, that has increased a lot. The Ryzen 7000 has 5200 official IMC spec, even though that's kind of a little bit of a sneaky thing because AMD gave you and gave me the ones to test for 6400 megatransfers per second, and I was running the G.Skill Neo 6400 megatransfers per second, 128 gigabyte kit, so that's 4 times 32 gigabytes, and it was completely fine. The Ryzen 7000 Threadripper IMC was kind of very conservative, whereas now they've literally put it into writing. It is supported 6400 megatransfers per second, which actually matches the 285K. I think you can probably go even faster in there, but on a workstation platform, you really want to stick to the stock specs as much as possible because stability is the one that you're going for here more than the actual consumer platforms. But the increase from Ryzen 7000 is 1200 megahertz. That's incredible speed increase compared to the previous generation. The cache is exactly the same. The power draw is exactly the same. And max power draw, you're going to see later on in the video where we enable PBO, you can get the CPU to pull even more power. Are we going to get more increase in performance? How much? We'll see. In terms of process node, I believe it has changed to 4 nanometer from 5 nanometer. So there's a little bit of an increase in there. It's the same architecture that you have on the Ryzen 9000 desktop, so 9950X, but now basically on the Threadripper system, we're just making the CPU bigger, slapping more dies on, having more memory support, having a bit more cache. But in essence, the core dies, the CCDs are the same architecture as the Ryzen 9000. Incredible way of actually making CPU architecture very simple in terms of pro consumer platform, and then the Threadripper, we're just making it bigger, adding more power, boom, and we're getting incredible support here. For the motherboard, I'm using the Asus TRX 50 Pro Sage motherboard. Bear in mind, this is the number 1. There is also number 2 version available that has higher memory support and perhaps some of the other smaller tweaks, but I'm using the first one. If you want to see the second one featured on the channel, hit that like button, let me know in the comments below. Hopefully we can get that one in. Then I'm using G.Skill 128 gigabytes, 6400 megahertz RAM, which is the same RAM kit as on the previous Ryzen 7000. I'm using a Samsung 9100 Pro 2 terabyte operating system drive, and that's where all the assets and everything's on. For the cooling, we're using a Silverstone interesting 360mm AIO that came with it. It's got really good coverage, so the whole IHS is covered. It's very good. The only thing I changed on that one was the actual fans, because I didn't like the included fans. They just didn't look as good in terms of performance, so I added extra better fans, but you should be fine even with the stock fans. We're running an RTX 4090 on an open Testbench setup, which is exactly the same as all on the other platforms. If you want to check out any of the Testbench setup or other specs, I'm going to leave the links in the video description below, or if you want to buy the Threadripper, check out the QR code in here or the links in the video description below. So I have 3 CPUs that I want to compare with each other. So the Threadripper Pro, Ryzen 9 9950X, and the Intel Core Ultra 285K with the latest boost profile. Where does the Threadripper really line up here, especially the 9970X, and that's what you're going to see through here. So in terms of Cinebench R24, we've got the Threadripper as the base, and then everything else is calculated to it. The 285K in single core is about 15.6% faster, and that's usually what we see as well. These big, heavy Threadripper systems, their single core is not as snappy, but as the generation goes up, they're more and more matched to the Ryzen 9000 or the same Ryzen consumer platform single core speed, as you can see, the 9950X is only 6% faster. So the Threadripper is very, very close to that. In terms of multi-core performance, oh my goodness, the 32 cores are on another level because Intel is running single threaded, so there's 24 cores and single threads, and it consists P cores and E cores, so not all cores are equal, whereas on the Threadripper, every single core is the massive core, just boost all the time, and we're getting pretty much double the performance, 41% slower on the 285K and 46% slower on the 9950X. In fact, if you look at the scaling from 9950X, which is 16 core, to the 30 core, the multi-core performance, the scaling is very, very linear, which is amazing to see. And that takes a lot of engineering from AMD because usually when just make it bigger and more power, the scaling is not linear. It usually goes a little bit more of a conservative curve because it's just not possible, but this is impressive. Looking at Geekbench 6, which tests more different things that the CPU can do, opening documents and unzipping things and more like general CPU usage rather than just rendering, the 285K is less faster in the single core score compared to the Cinebench, only 7.8% slower. And interestingly, the 9950X here is actually faster than the 285K and about 10% faster compared to the 9970X. But then in multi-core score, Geekbench doesn't really take use of all of the cores and threads, and the 285K is only 18% slower and the 9950X about 26% slower in the multi-core scores. Looking at AI, first, Onyx AI, the 285K is about 8% faster in the single, about the same on half, and about 3% slower in the quantized scores. The 9950X is about 7.4% faster in the single, and for some reason, whenever I test the 9950X on my system, I just got a ridiculous error. I think this could be an error of this, so take this with a pinch of salt because I don't think it is 4 times faster on the 9950X in half score. It's just an error of the benchmark, but that's what I'm getting, so that's what I'm showing you. 286% faster. I don't think that's the case really, but quantized is about 3% slower, so not a massive difference in this AI benchmark. On the OpenVINO, we can see 285K about 40% slower in single, 52 and 52% slower, roughly in half in quantized scores, and then the 9950X slightly less, about 30% slower in single, about the same 30 in half as well, and about 14% in quantized scores. So depending on your AI workload or the way you're using this, the Threadripper platform really is beneficial here. And I want to add a little other note for this AI workloads that you don't really see in these benchmarks here, which is the RAM capacity and then the GPU support that you can add to this. If you do build an LLM, there's a huge benefit of going with a Ryzen Threadripper system, especially the Threadripper 9000, because it's got more PCIe lanes. So you can really kit it up to this particular platform, up to 1 terabyte of RAM, multiple GPUs, and then run them at full bandwidth, which just is absolutely insane what you could do with this. Now more creator-focused benchmarks of video, photo editing, and 3D. Let's see how this performs. In Photoshop, the 285K is about 4.6% faster. The 9950X is about 20% faster. And we know that Photoshop really isn't amazing for Threadripper, but at the same time, to be so close to 285K is impressive. We're closer here on Photoshop than on the single core. If you remember the single threaded performance of the Cinebench R24, you can see that the 285K is not as far ahead in here than on Cinebench R24. Moving on to Lightroom Classic, and here Lightroom Classic kind of isn't as impressive for the Threadripper system. 285K is 33.4% faster, and this is the highest score that I have seen. The 285K Ultra platform for Lightroom Classic really performs well, and it just works. If you want the best kind of platform for that, Intel Core Ultra is the best at that. The 9950X is about 6% faster than the Threadripper, so slightly faster, but at the same time, doesn't seem like the Threadripper system is worth getting for this Lightroom Classic scenario, unless the only thing that you're doing is just putting lots of photos together, merging lots of stuff, or exporting loads and loads of photos, then perhaps the Threadripper platform can be useful. But I would say that 99.9% people for Lightroom Classic, the Threadripper probably isn't the best fit for you. But moving on to video editing, and here's where things get really impressive. The Intel Core Ultra has always been the fastest and the best for Adobe Premiere Pro until now. The 9950X has hit the highest score ever. And bear in mind, this is not with the NVIDIA RTX 5000 series GPUs that actually offer you extra codec support from different codecs. So here we really see just the CPU taking its full ability. And how good is it? You can see that the 285K is about 3 to 5% slower in the standard and extended overall scores. In terms of best bang for buck, obviously still Intel's got the better bang for buck here, but the ultimate performance is not on Intel's side anymore. The long GOP score 11% slower. At the same time, I do think there's some kind of a weird thing going on with the 285K where either drivers or it doesn't fully utilize the QuickSync, because that QuickSync score is slower on the 285K compared to the 14900K, which doesn't make sense. Interframe 6% slower. In extended and standard is about 9% slower, but generally most of the things are slower on the 285K. And when comparing it to the 9950X, then you can really see the Threadripper shine here. 13 and 17% slower in the extended and standard overall scores, especially interframe, 22.2% slower in the extended interframe scores, and then even further 22.88% slower in the standard interframe scores. That's just absolutely incredible. So I'm super impressed with the Threadripper performance in Premiere Pro. Moving on to After Effects, and here I have Intel versus the Threadripper, because again, After Effects has changed on Geekbench how they test and how they perform. So I'm gonna have to retest all of the CPUs for After Effects to actually populate the data for you again. We can see that the Threadripper doesn't really look impressive for After Effects here. The 285K is quite a bit faster, and I wonder if that's to do with either the faster single core clock speeds or the multi-core isn't as important in here, but the 285K really is a lot faster in pretty much any scenario here apart from 2D, extended and standard scores, but I don't think that's really where the big benefit here After Effects is, so perhaps that's not worth for After Effects. Let me know if you agree with this in the comment section below. But moving on to DaVinci Resolve, and here again, we've got the new best CPU. The Threadripper 9970X is the best. 285K is about 5.8% slower in the basic score. Bear in mind, the basic score is the free version of DaVinci Resolve. Standard and extended are when you paid and where you can fully utilize all the hardware. So that's what I'd recommend. So look at these scores a little bit more. But we've got about 9.8% slower on the 285K and about 5% slower in the extended overall scores. 22% slower in this long GOP scores. 12% in interframe scores. 18% slower in raw scores. And roughly about the same in GPU scores. That's ridiculous. Fusion, interestingly, is faster on the 285K as well as AI. But in general performance, the 9970X is on top of the chart. And when you look at the 9950X, then you can see how much better the 32 core is compared to the 16 core. We're up to 20% faster in the overall scores, and some of the scores like interframe are 30% faster. That's just insane performance increase on the Threadripper. But up to this point, this is not really where Threadripper shines the most. Where Threadripper shines the most is 3D. The 32 cores, 64 threads, and this is where things get impressive. Looking at Blender here, the 285K is literally half the speed. Or in other words, the Threadripper is twice as fast comparing it to both of the 9950X and 285K. It's just insane. You're getting more than double the performance in classroom rendering. Or 9950X is slightly faster than the Intel there, but still the Threadripper 9970X is literally twice as fast as the consumer platform. Now, why this is impressive is because from 16 cores to 32 cores, we're literally getting double the performance in CPU rendering, which is crazy. And if you want to add extra PBO, which you'll see in a minute, you can get the scaling really linear and perhaps even more just because you push more power through, and that's insane. Bear in mind, you're not pushing double the wattage through of the CPU. The Ryzen 9 9950X pulls around 200 watts, which we'll talk about in a minute, but then the Threadripper is 350, which means double the cores, but less wattage, so the watts per performance on the Threadripper is actually better compared to the 9950X, apart from idle. Moving on to V-Ray, another CPU rendering benchmarks here, and you can see that the 285K is less than half the score, 50.5% slower, and then the 9950X 48.3% slower. Again, we're seeing more than double the performance compared to 285K, or about double from 9950X in the V-Ray rendering. Let's take a look at the power consumption then. How much do we consume? So in stock, if you just turn it on, which you can see that the 9970X pulls 350 watts, which is exactly the same power as the previous generation and is a bit more compared to the 285K. 285K pulls about 236 watts, and then the 9950X about 200 watts. If we enable PBO or enable some higher boost profiles for Intel and AMD as well, we can see that in PBO, the Threadripper is pulling 420 to 490. So in Cinebench, I was seeing roughly around 420 to 430 watts pulled, but in V-Ray, then I could see it even further, 490 watts, which is actually quite a bit less compared to the 64 core, which you want to see in the upcoming video, because that can pull quite a bit more power. The 285K, all limits removed, I can see about 275 watts pulled, and then the 9950X with PBO is pulling around 265 watts. Now, knowing that you can enable the PBO, is it actually worth for creators? How much more performance are you gonna get? So I did the V-Ray and Cinebench in stock, and then with PBO enabled. In V-Ray, we're actually getting about 4.5 to 5% basic increase in the CPU rendering score, which just really takes the linear scaling to a whole other level. And I think you are pulling kind of double the wattage now, over 400 watts, but you can really get more than double the performance in V-Ray if wanted to. In Cinebench, I don't see that much of a difference. In fact, we went slightly backwards. When enabling PBO, I'm seeing about 2.3% slower performance than with PBO enabled. So as a creator, I would say enabling PBO is not worth it unless you're really doing rendering and time is the essence. I guess it's good to know that if you needed to go a little bit faster, hitting that nitrous button can get your CPU a little bit faster. So what the heck then? Is this Threadripper impressive and good? Yes, it's really, really good. I mean, I just feel bad for Intel. I don't even have the samples, and the last Xeon we tested is old now, so it really isn't relevant in here. In terms of power consumption and performance, Intel really needs to step it up because they're really losing it in the top-end server and high-end desktop platforms. It's bad news for us because when one company is doing so much better than everybody else, then the price is going to rank up and we are paying higher pricing. And right now, the Threadripper is just the better option in pretty much every single option way. Whether you look at the price or the performance, AMD is the one to get. If you want to check out the links, they're in the description below. Thanks guys for watching. Let me know what you think. And are you excited about the 64 core? Because that's coming out very, very soon. Thanks guys for watching. God bless. Bye-bye.